at the University of Warwick, UK. Professor B.B. Pandey, former teacher at Delhi University. Professor Manoj Kumar Sinha, Director, Indian Law Institute. Sri Chandra C. Prustri, Registrar, Indian Law Institute. Dear students, learned faculties, and other esteemed dignitaries of the dais. The Indian Law Institute has the honor and privilege as a part of our lecture series to have amongst us Professor Norrie to deliver a special lecture to the students on the topic Power of Love and Love of Power. We are equally honored to have amongst us Honorable Justice Zakat Sikri, who has courteously consented to preside over this special lecture, and to Professor B.B. Pandey also. Let me introduce Professor Norrie by reading a brief profile of him so as to provide an insight into his personality, works and life. Professor Norrie is a professor of law at the University of Warwick, UK. He is also the president of the International Association for Critical Realism. He taught previously at the University of Dunedin, London, and he was Edmund Davis Professor of Criminal Law and Criminal Justice at King's College, London, and held the Draper's Chair in Law at the Queen's Mary and Westfield College. His areas of interest are criminal law, the idea of justice, critical and dialectical philosophy, and social legal theory. His books include Law, Ideology and Punishment, Punishment, Responsibility and Justice, Crime, Reason and History, and Dialectic and Difference. His book, Law and the Beautiful Soul, won the Hart SLSA Book Prize in the year 2006. Besides editing a number of books, he was also the editor of King's Law Journal and Social and Legal Studies and served on several editorial boards. Currently, he is working on criminal law defenses such as loss of control and self-defense, and the problems raised for criminal law by euthanasia. He is also interested in the area of responsibility and guilt, and in authoritarianism and the modern reshaping of criminal law in response to economic and political change. Philosophically, he works with critical realism and its relation to post-structural and dialectical philosophy. His new book on Roy Bhaskar's philosophy focuses on ethics and the grounds of justice. At the University of Warwick, he supervises research students on critical approaches to criminal law and legal theory, and on law and political philosophy in a social theoretical perspective. To Honorable Justice, moving on, to Honorable Justice Arjun K. Sikri, we are indeed honored and privileged to have you amongst us. And I request Professor Manoj Kumar Sinha, Director ILI, to welcome Honorable Justice Zakat Sikri by presenting a bouquet to him. Please. I request the Registrar Indian Law Institute, S.C. Prustri sir, to welcome Professor Norrie by presenting a bouquet to him. Thank you, sir. And before I request Honorable Justice Zakat Sikri to preside over the function, I would like to read a brief profile of him. Justice Zakat Sikri had an illustrious request Norrie sir to present bouquet to Professor B.B. Pandey.
Just share it.
Justice Sikri to please preside over the function.
Thank you very much. Thank you and good evening to all of you. Professor Norrie, my professor, Professor B.B. Pandey, Mr. Manoj, Registrar, Mr. Musti, another distinguished professor and lawyer sitting here, Mr. Professor Lokesh Madhek, Lokendra Madhek, my dear students. See, when I was asked to preside over today's lecture, this is a lecture which is to be given by Professor Allen, I was fascinated with the topic of this lecture. It says, between the power of love and the love of power. And I was really, frankly speaking, totally at sea as to what is the meaning of this topic and what would be the subject matter of this lecture. If you see, it can have political overtone, that on the one hand we have power of love, and you see what you can win with the power of love. When you think of this, you will have in mind persons like Mahatma Gandhi, persons like this who is going to be our Mother Teresa. So who love, with their love, they exuded power and were able to win the hearts of people and were able to win the society. On the other hand, we have people who have lust for power. It says love of power. And so therefore we may have an example of a person like Hitler. If you go to mythology, we have a person like Ravan who wanted to conquer the entire world, not only this world but all the three worlds. And although it was lust of power, but what was the end? But then I thought that it can't be the subject matter of the lecture by a person who is a law professor. Then what could be the other meaning? Is it, I thought that maybe in administrative law, we think of power which is given to the three wings of the constitution, three wings of the state by the constitution. There is executive power, which includes power of governance. There is a lot of discretionary power, power to frame policies, executions, etc. We have power with the legislature to legislate. We have power with the courts, power of judicial review of administrative action, whatever executive does, and power of judicial review of even legislative action. The purpose of this is that yes, the other two wings don't misuse their power. They exercise their power within the confines. But then there are limits of power of judicial review also. So therefore I thought that it could be this. Then I read the CV of Professor Allen, which was given to me, which showed that he is an expert in criminal law. So maybe this topic may have some of the nuances of criminal law, some criminal law philosophy he wants to share with us. But I was not able to fathom if this is the topic to be discussed in the field of criminal law, then what would be the subject matter? I am very frank. So therefore I thought that let me not apply my brain and think about it. I'll also come here as a novice, as one amongst you will hear him. When I came here, I just tried to find out before the lecture, yes, my third hunch was correct that it has some relationship with criminal law. But as I said, it relates to criminal law, I am not able to understand what it would be meaning. So therefore, I request Professor Allen to start and share his thoughts with us. Let us learn from this topic what he wants to say in criminology or criminal law, the relationship between the power of love and love of power. Thank you, and over to you, Professor.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I'd like to thank the Indian Law Institute very, very warmly for this very kind invitation. And I'd like to thank Mr. Justice Sikri for agreeing to chair the session, and especially when I had obviously raised a certain concern for him as to what the topic of the lecture would be. But I suspect that Mr. Justice Sikri is one of those who likes to think broadly about such matters, and that therefore there's a genuine sense of intrigue as to what it is that I'm going to say. I'd also like to thank, if I may, the National Law University of Delhi for inviting me to come here this week. It's been a real honour and privilege to be here and to have the opportunity to expand over a course of lectures on what one thinks, because often one doesn't get that opportunity. And I have to say that I think that under with the support and guidance of Professor Pandey and also Professor Upen Bakshi, who unfortunately had to be elsewhere today, I've really found this to be an engaging city in which to think about the criminal law. There is something in the Delhi air, perhaps, that encourages one, apart from the things that one ought not to inhale. There is perhaps a sense of adventure and spiritedness that allows one to push what one thinks. Yeah. So this week at the National Law University, we've been considering the nature of the criminal law and the way in which we might think of it. I've been suggesting two questions to ask of the law. The first question is, how does the law judge? And the second question is, how do we judge the law's judgment? There are two questions where many legal theorists, many criminal lawyers think there is just one. Obviously, social and political dimensions, but it also involves ethical dimensions, and somewhere between the social and the political and the ethical, there is this thing that we know and generally have quite a lot of affection for, which we call law. Law sits between the social, the political on the one hand, and the ethical on the other hand. It represents a stratum that sits between these two different directions. With its involvement in the social and the political, and I'm a contextual lawyer, so I believe in the significance of context, social context, for explaining the shape of the law. With this location, law pulls off quite an amazing feat. It is a mode of social and political regulation, but it takes the form of an ethics. And here I'm talking particularly about criminal law. It takes the form of an ethics of responsibility, an ethics of just punishment, an ethics of individual desert. And what we have been trying to do this week at the National Law University is to unpack this complex phenomenon of ethics in law, sitting in relation to the social and the political. If law, however, is a mode of social and political ordering in the first instance, which then has the form of a moral reckoning between the state and the subject, then some problems arise. A student asked me the other day whether ultimately legal ethics are all relative. After all, if law is contextual, social, political and historical, then presumably so are its ethics. Is it all relativism, a matter of how we judge in time and place? There are many reasons for thinking this is so, in the way we generally think. Social theorists say we live in a post-metaphysical age, where the ethical dimension no longer has fundamental grounding. Postmodern thought makes similar points about the lack of foundations to our normativity.
Critical theorists say that modern history has shown how nothing is barred to human actors. After barbarism and cruelty, after Auschwitz as the emblem of that, how can we believe in the power of ethics in relation to law? It seems to me that sophisticated and serious as much of this thinking is, it takes us away from where we need to be. We need to be able to think through what it means in ethical terms to be human, even, especially, in a world that denies our humanity. With regard to law, we need to understand not only how law judges, a legal system, a positive legal system, how it judges, but what those judgments are based upon and how those judgments are related to an ethical world. And so how we may judge, how we may not only be actors within a legal system, how we may be judges within the law, but how we may also judge law's judgment. But how do we do this in a secular, post-metaphysical age? For someone like myself, I can't access religion or scriptural thought or the words of a religious tradition or a divinity. My thinking is secular. Often such thinking expresses important truths, however, while sadly at other times it misleads us, sometimes gravely. But I feel the need to find ways of undergirding our practices, both to show what is good in them and to be critical when necessary. Accordingly, I've been trying to think through how we might understand our ethical feelings in a non-religious way. The key here is in the word feelings. What I'm looking to develop is what might be called a moral grammar of the emotions in relation to the law. So my talk today is on guilt, what we mean by that term morally, in order to set some kind of basis for thinking about criminal law. So my thinking is going to be foundational and metaphysical rather than directly into the legal. Guilt is a key term in law, though we might see it as one that is rather rhetorical. Guilty or not guilty, my lord. But it's also, I think, a key moral feeling, and I'm going to try and explore that sense in order to have a basis beyond law for thinking about law. My approach to this will be to look at two thinkers in the tradition of psychoanalysis of the 20th century, Melanie Klein and Jessica Benjamin. It might be an unusual approach to take in a legal setting, but I believe the stakes are high and we need to find some new ways to understand an old idea. On the screen there, you'll see the flow of the lecture. You'll see that, and I apologise to Mr. Justice Sikri for having omitted guilt from the title that was given.
I was going to say, this guilt word is not here. I should have understood.
The blaming for the title has to be laid at the feet of Professor Bajpayee from NLUD, who visited me in UK with Professor Pandey and said, "Alan, you're really well known in India for your titles. Everyone knows your book Law and the Beautiful Soul." But he didn't say you're known for the quality of your work. He said you're known for your titles. So I thought, well, if that's what we'll be celebrating, I'm going to try hard to give you a good title today, and that's where it came from. So what I'm going to be doing is taking you. I've got a discussion of the problems of a practical problem of ethics and what that tells us about guilt. And that's when I'm looking at a recent book published on the women's concentration camp in Germany in the Second World War at Ravensbrück. Then I'm going to be talking about the power of love. And I'm going to be talking about the way in which Melanie Klein links love and hate and brings out of the relationship between love and hate a dynamic of guilt and reparation. I don't think that's enough. What I want is an understanding of the way in which we are engaged with guilt And I find that in Jessica Benjamin's work, where love and mutual recognition are linked together. But she, and this is important, she links love and mutual recognition to a pathological condition, which is not the power of love, but the love of power. And when she's talking about that, she's talking about domination, the way in which domination is part of our lives, and submission with it. So between guilt, between the power of love and the love of power, is to think about what it means to feel guilty in relation to how we access in our lives an ethic of love and an ethic of domination. In a recent book by Sarah Helm called If This Is a Woman, Helm writes about the women's concentration camp at Ravensbrück. It's a vivid evocation of the cruelty that human beings are able to bestow on other human beings under the right social conditions. Told from the experience of survivors from many different countries, Helm gives a real sense of what it must have been like for human beings to experience the systematic abuse the women of Ravensbrück suffered. From the deliberate starvation of women and babies, to agonizing, often fatal medical experiments, to routine beating, to gassing, poisoning, hanging, lethal injection and shooting, to slave labor, to exhaustion and death. The list of the wicked things people did goes on. Helm's title comes from the poem by Primo Levi, If This Is a Man, where he describes the abject state of the victims of the camps. But it might also be asked of the perpetrators, what kind of human beings were these? If these were women, the guards at Ravensbrück, what kind of people were they? The question has been raised, most notably by Hannah Arendt, as to whether or how it is possible to judge people who behave in such vile ways. At bottom, a legal process